Okay, so let's get started. What can we do to embrace digital transformation securely? My name is Chris Sullivan. I am the CEO of Nymi Corporation. We have some great panelists, which I will introduce, some very impressive panelists, which I'll introduce in a moment. But first, just sort of introducing the topic. What is digital transformation? That's a buzzword that gets thrown around quite frequently. We think about data is the new oil, get a bunch of data to apply it to your business. I think a purist would say, improving existing processes with more data is not true digital transformation, but creating new business models be more of that ilk. Doesn't really matter to us. I think what we're talking about here is because of digital transformation, there's a drive to connect everything to get that data, and that's causing some significant issues. So specifically today, we're going to talk about the convergence of IT, OT, and physical security. IT meaning business systems where people necessarily connect to the web, they're getting emails, they're clicking on things, they're connected to the cloud, it's part of their job. That makes it open season for adversaries to attack those systems. OT systems have traditionally been for critical processes, things that simply cannot fail. And those are typically or traditionally, I think we're going to talk more about that, but managed separately from a systems provisioning maintenance perspective, from a security perspective, but also because the specific discipline to make those control processes, SCADA systems, whatever your domain is, run very efficiently and very, very consistently is different. So that's typically or traditionally been segmented. And then finally, physical security has grown up. It's actually probably the oldest discipline here. It's grown up differently, but everything is converging. Started 20 years ago with ERP systems, but now with digital transformation, everybody wants to connect everything. Additionally, or I think importantly as well, cloud-based services are becoming more and more important to sort of OT systems as well. So we connect these things together, we increase the threat surface dramatically. We could spend the rest of the session talking about different breaches like Colonial Pipeline, where it's becoming more and more acute, the pain in these systems. So especially for critical systems, critical infrastructure, we think about some things you may not think about a critical infrastructure, like, we're working with a company that does water reclamation or sewage treatment for one of the major North American cities. They have one plant that processes 40 million gallons a day of raw sewage. If they can't process that sewage, it has to dump. So that's not just an environmental issue, that's a human health issue. So there's sort of relentless forces driving us together, and that's causing a bunch of problems. So what we want to talk about today and what you can expect on the panel is that we're going to talk about what can we do from an organizational perspective, what can we do from a technical perspective to both reduce the threat surface, but also make these systems, organizations, technical systems work together more efficiently, effectively, what have you. I do expect and hope, my hope, and I think all the panelists' hope is that this is very active audience participation. That will start now. So we're going to ask questions during the chat. First question is, where are you from? It seems to be a very international audience from the registrations. So if you could just pop into the chat where you're from, that would be great. Give us a sense of the different places people are coming from. There are reactions in a Teams meeting. So those reactions are up in the upper right-hand corner. I think it's a smiley face with a hand. You can put in a thumbs up, meaning you support some idea, some comment from the speaker, what have you. We may extemporaneously ask specific questions as we're going through. And then the last and final bit, if I'm not going too fast, is we would like to sort of start to build a community here of sort of like-minded people that can share ideas. So if you proactively opt in, we have to think about things like GDPR, but if you proactively opt in, we will be sharing the contact information, LinkedIn's emails of the people that registered with only the people that proactively opted in. If you would like your email or your LinkedIn excluded, you can put that in the chat as well, and we'll take care of that for you. So that is it in terms of organizational stuff. I could see a bunch of countries scrolling up. That was fantastic. So I'd now like to move to the panelists, and I would say these are esteemed panelists. So first one we have is Christian Hammer. Christian, you want to raise your hand there? So Christian is head of information security for ElevateBio. if you don't know ElevateBio, I think their tagline is the future of gene and cell therapy. Think about a pharmaceutical company that works specifically for you, specifically on your genes and your cells. I've been working in the pharma industry. Nymi works heavily in the pharma industry for a couple of years now. I can tell you that that's no simple challenge, especially to scale that out and serve a bunch of people on very, very specialized medicine specific to you. It's pretty amazing stuff. Christian was kind enough to give me a tour of their plants, or one of their plants, just a couple of weeks ago. Fascinating. I did ask the participants for a favorite movie, favorite Christmas movie. That's just to give you a little bit of context of where they're coming from. I would say the responses were consistently a bit odd. Also, they have to use a quote from the movie in some point. They have to use a quote from the movie in a discussion. So Christian's favorite movie is Die Hard. I'll just pause there. I don't know if there's a reason for that, Christian, or
yeah, I'm so welcome to the party, Sully. And I wasn't meaning to provoke anyone with that choice. That has a kind of a special place in my heart. Came out a couple years before I was in college, and there was a particular reading period and final exam period my freshman year where some friends had rented that movie on VHS, which I guess sort of dates this. They probably got it from Blockbuster, right? So some of you probably don't know what that is. But anyway, that was an opportunity instead of studying, or maybe in addition to studying for final exams. And so that year I probably watched that movie like 100 times. So for that reason, we don't have to debate if it's a Christmas movie or not, but for me, because it was sort of contemporaneous with that time of year, it is.
All right, great. I will just say that the quote "Welcome to the party" doesn't get credit since you used it in the specifically referencing the movie. You have to work it into the discussion. Next on the docket is Rob Kay. Manager of Technical Security Engineering for Rivian Automotive. And Rob, I think, is focused largely on physical security. But Rob, correct me if I'm wrong on that, please. If you don't know Rivian Automotive, I'd be a bit surprised, but it is possible. And so Rivian just IPO'd about 5 weeks ago. I looked, Rob, and they said they shipped 180 vehicles in October. And yet they are the fifth most valuable automotive company in the world for market cap. So I think about them as the truck version, the heavy equipment version of Tesla, maybe. But you probably don't like that to be compared to Tesla. But anyway, electric trucks. Yeah. So Rob's favorite movie, National Lampoon. I assume that's National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think growing up in the UK, it formed my opinion of what a Christmas in the US looked like. I assumed that everyone lived in a house where they could put in a 20-foot tree and host a huge family gathering. And then I moved to California, so you can probably see how that worked out. But I do not have a 20-foot tree in my house right now.
Okay, good. And last but not least, by any means least, Mr. Phil Neray. So. Cloud security person, specifically director of IoT and industrial cybersecurity from Microsoft. Microsoft is one of these companies that certainly doesn't need an introduction. And Christmas movie is one that I have not seen, In Bruges.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I joined Microsoft about 1.5 years ago when Microsoft acquired CyberX, where I was part of the management team with an OT cybersecurity focused company. In Bruges is a 2008 movie with Colin Farrell. It's a black comedy. I highly recommend it, but I can't use any of the quotes because all the quotes involve either guns or 4-letter words, or often both at the same time. Usually, exclaimed in a British working class accent. So it's a hilarious movie, but it's a little sad at the same time.
I think there's some quotes coming up in the chat, Phil. So, all right. So obviously some great panelists. Let's get on to the discussion at hand, right? So, and I do think in terms of there's this convergence of IT, OT, physical security. And that is causing, there's obviously reasons for that. There's a lot of benefits to that. But it's also causing tremendous increase in the threat surface. tremendous problems that are in the news every single day. There was a ton of, there's a White House task force on this. It's certainly the focus for the new CISA in the U.S. There's in just a 2-month period over the summer, there were directives and guidance. Directives meaning thou shalt do this, which was actually in some cases the first time, say TSA over transportation, including pipelines, but directives from Homeland Security, FBI, TSA, what have you, mandating additional controls around OT environments. So that's all sort of going on in the backdrop. In talking to the panelists, there seems to be sort of two ways to look at this. One is around organizationally what's happening, and the other is sort of technically what's happening. So we'd start with the organizational side of that thing and about the convergence of these sort of disciplines, IT, OT, physical security. First off, from a maturity perspective, if we think of something like the Carnegie Mellon maturity model, which is sort of everything is done ad hoc, or you have an inventory of things and you start to have consistent processes, you're learning from those processes, whatever maturity model you want to use. Is there a difference for the panelists? Is there a difference in the sort of maturity across these different disciplines today, IT security, OT security, physical security? Phil, I'll pick on you. How's that to get started?
Sure, Chris. I'll be glad to start on that one. So there are some big differences because IT security has been around for 15, 20 years. We have all kinds of telemetry that we can use to identify suspicious or unauthorized activity. We have endpoint detections. We have network layer detections. We have SIMs. We have lots of different ways to track the adversaries in our environments. But in the OT world, because they were assumed to be traditionally air-gapped, and there's some debate about whether they actually were ever air-gapped, because vendors always needed remote access to those systems to be able to maintain and monitor them. But because it was assumed they were traditionally air-gapped, there wasn't the same focus on monitoring or even just knowing what assets you have in the environment. And with digital transformation, of course, that's changed now. There's no more air gap for sure. There's bidirectional traffic constantly. The IT applications need to keep track of what's going on the OT side. The OT side is communicating back to the ERP and the CRM systems what's being built or manufactured. So there's many ways now for adversaries to go from IT to OT or OT to IT and back and forth. And then when you throw in Internet of Things, new types of devices like sensors that are directly connected to the internet, it increases the attack surface even more. So I think there's a lot of work to do, and with Colonial Pipeline and the JBS Global Food Processor attacks this year, I think it's raised board level awareness, and they're starting to ask all kinds of questions about, what are we doing to prevent this from happening to us?
Okay, Rob?
Yeah, I think a similar story in the physical security world. Perhaps an older profession, but one that's taken longer to catch up on the maturity scale. I mean, the phrase CCTV is often widely used, but by definition, it means closed circuit television. I suspect not many of the systems being installed in modern buildings are anything resembling closed circuit anymore. Most of the devices are placed on IT networks, perhaps not treated with the same control methods that other devices on the IT network would be. And unfortunately, there's been plenty of news stories over the last few years about attacks, using botnets on potentially security devices, as they enter the world of IoT and reside on the IT network. So rapidly maturing, but still a long ways to go.
All right, thanks. And I would assume that your systems at Rivian and certainly Christian's at ElevateBio, the ones that I saw at ElevateBio, that they are the most modern, brand new, sophisticated. So Christian, I assume that all those manufacturing systems are connected as well.
So they're certainly connected to networks, and there are controls in between, but data flows as people have observed.
Yeah. Okay. So So there is already convergence, although, I think Phil pointed out that people thought there wasn't, or maybe there wasn't always, but certainly there's convergence. Does this vary by company, do you think? Or by industry? Some industries are behind others, or?
Yeah, I think if you were to look, the more regulated industries have paid a little more attention to it. So if you're an electric utility, obviously, you've got some regulations, but even there, I'll point out that the regulations are not that strict. There's no need, for example, for continuous monitoring, even in the electric utility industry. But we found across manufacturing that it varies a lot. And I think it depends also if other companies in your industry have been attacked in a public way, it might have gotten your attention a few years ago. For example, if you were affected by the NotPetya attack in 2017, that might have raised awareness.
Okay, thanks. And Rob, I was thinking about your comments the other day, but I mean, you guys just went IPO, so did that generate additional regulatory pressure to sort of connect things up or to take a higher level view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you have 9 lives, that's a good way to spend them all at once. And the either taking a company from a private company to a public company, or being a public company, or a utility, or even local infrastructure, government, safe city kind of organization, all differ hugely in their objectives and approach, but probably share many of the same threat vectors, but approach them significantly differently. So I think whether we're talking from an organizational perspective or from a technology perspective, there's a huge chasm in maturity levels and approach between public, private, and national government.
Okay. All right. So thinking about the organizational stuff, and I've been around a couple of decades. Certainly, when there's organizational change, it's always difficult to get, people to have an empathy for what the other organization is doing, get them to work together. That kind of change is particularly hard. I can tell you in pharma, they are so, and this doesn't speak to ElevateBio, but and who's sort of nimble, sort of high tech company, but a lot of our customers are these huge global corporations, and there does seem to be a sense, I don't want to judge, and it's not universal, but there does seem to be a sense that from the OT people, the IT people don't know our jobs, they don't know what we're doing. And we have to get these systems running. And then there's a sense from the corporate people, we need to connect everything together. We need to have one instance of the manufacturing systems, what have you, that we can replicate quickly, that kind of stuff. So they're taking maybe a more business approach. So having said all that, what are the best practices for getting these teams to sort of move together organizationally to get them aligned and from a governance model, that kind of stuff? I don't know if, Phil, do you have any ideas on that? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the organizational issues tend to be the bigger ones rather than the technology issues. And that's because for many years, the teams have been siloed. The folks that run the factories were like, don't come in here. You don't understand. Our priorities are availability. Our priorities are safety. And IT folks sometimes came in with the mentality, well, why aren't you patching? And, why aren't you upgrading all these older Windows systems? And so there was a lack of empathy and a lack of understanding across the two teams traditionally. And so I think the first thing is to establish trust and to remind everyone that, when plants go down, everyone suffers, whether you're in IT or OT. It helps to have a top-down directive that says this is important. Our business relies on our plants, and if our plants get attacked with ransomware, that's going to affect our revenue, and it's going to affect all of our careers and our stock options. So the top-down approach is important, but then just the bottoms-up approach, having IT folks visiting the plants to understand how they work, to understand their priorities, to understand the limitations of applying some IT-style policies to plants, and then vice versa, having folks from the OT side spend some time in your security operations center, and that will also help when you start building monitoring into the environment and you get an alert, then there'll be those personal relationships. So you can call, you know who to call in the plant when something suspicious happens, and you can go and troubleshoot it. If a PLC gets reprogrammed, you want to know, was that a malicious activity or was that something that was actually done? It doesn't happen too often, but you have to know who to call to figure that out. So building those personal relationships, both bottoms up and tops down, really helps. A CISO once told me, the best meetings are held in a pub. So having those meetings in the pub rather than in a dingy conference room will help as well.
Okay. And Christian, I'm curious about, your space. Your company is like brand new, building everything from the ground up. Is that even an issue, or is just everybody, sort of rowing in the same direction, or is there anarchy? Or let me rephrase the question quickly. Not at your company, but at companies similar to you in size and youngness and that kind of stuff. What would you think?
Well, I mean, I can tell you I've seen an evolution just very recently between we're going to try to manage this together, but, when we think about an org chart, there's a little bit of a wall to we're not doing that anymore, right? And so I came from higher ed where we had all kinds of OT, right? So there was a medical clinic that had medical devices and a power plant that sort of had electric, right? And then we had a police department that had all the, CCTV and all that other stuff. And so I watched this happen a couple of different times in a couple of those different environments. And I have to say that everything that you've both said really resonates and is right on in terms of the empathy in particular. And I think a governance model that works pretty well is sort of, central governance, but with local expertise and respect from that, right? So I grew up on the IT side, and the thing that I sort of worry about is my colleagues in IT saying, hey, all of you people don't understand. We've done this already. We've done it 10 times before. Just do it this way. And as Phil pointed out, you've got to stop and you've got to understand and appreciate what actually goes on in these worlds and what people are trying to accomplish. And it is a little bit different. And so I think having that balance, the empathy from sort of an individual and a relationship perspective, and then that balance when you think about governance of still, having folks on the ground that are kind of, very, very close to what's happening in the process or the organization, but with a little more central governance and a little more scalability is a good approach.
All right. Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I love the way Christian and Phil use the word empathy, and I think it's so important to go into these conversations, into these discussions with an open mind. That empathy allows us to build understanding, to help us to tear down those barriers of this is my area of expertise. Nobody else could possibly perform half as well as I can in this area. And I think we have to trust our ability to learn more than we trust what we know, and we have to trust those around us that we are, driven by a combined mission, by a shared mission, and that by coming together in doing so, we're only going to improve the posture for the business.
Yeah, I'll tell you, my kids know I love the word empathy. I've heard that, just in the last 2 minutes, I've heard it like 4 times. That's a great word. There's a note in the chat I noticed from, and I'm probably going to butcher this, depends maybe on where you're from, but Philippe, probably. But the question is, do you see value in creating cross-functional teams?
So I'm happy to provide just a little of my own experience with that. In a couple of these opportunities to kind of reorganize and work more closely together. It started out with, we're going to have this sort of formerly OT team and then the IT team, and there'll be kind of different divisions. And that was sort of a mess until they created these cross-functional teams that sat together, they worked together. They gave them the unfortunate name of application portfolio teams. That's APT. And when they told me, we're APT, whatever, I was like, oh God, what's happening? We're under attack, right? But other than the name, it worked super, super well because, it really brought all of the right expertise together. And I think almost, developed that empathy, whether those folks wanted to have it or not.
Okay. All right, good. So we are converging. What does that convergence look like, say, from an organizational perspective? And, is it, I know some of the big pharmas, for example, they'll have an OT person company-wide. They'll have a CISO. The CISO traditionally was focused more on the IT stuff, but so what does that look like and what should that look like going forward around governance frameworks, what have you? And I think, Christian, you mentioned sort of a sort of hybrid model of corporate governance with sort of local autonomy. So maybe a bit more about what that looks like.
Well, I think that what I've seen is most of these things, the governance moving towards the CIO for better or worse or indifferent, right? And then, the folks in that organization kind of working more closely with the local groups to kind of move from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you think about the CISO's role, it's managing cyber risk for the company enterprise-wide while still supporting the business. So you can't say no to digital transformation. It's important for the business. Christian, I'm glad you're smiling. But at the same time, you need to do it in a way that's secure. And enterprise-wide risk includes risk in the OT side of the world as well. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has come to that conclusion. I'd say probably, a third or half of all CISOs have sort of come to that conclusion that they're also responsible for these new areas that they had not traditionally been responsible for. Gartner has been writing about something they call cyber physical systems, CPS, and that, now we're talking about not just data loss, which is what the CISOs traditionally been focused on, but physical security, safety, some of these other areas that are also part of the risk that you're managing as the CISO. So I think it's just it's natural for this to fall under the role of the CIO and the CISO.
Anybody else or any questions from the audience on that topic?
So I think so I absolutely agree with both Christian and Phil. I think I fear sometimes that the concept of cross-functional teams is an easy out. That if we roll all these teams up under the same person, that will solve our issues, and it can be more of a box checking exercise than an initiative to bring teams together. So I think the creation of cross-functional teams is definitely a positive, but I think it requires more than just an organizational reshuffle.
So Rob, I'll tell you, in my past life, I ran an innovation function for a tech company, and what we did there was we didn't dotted line folks. We actually moved folks. We moved folks out of engineering. We moved folks out of the field, out of services, what have you, and made them work in each other's jobs. So it wasn't cross-functional. We built essentially a new organization, but it was people were doing jobs that they weren't comfortable doing, and I think that was a fantastic experience for everybody involved, and we did some pretty cool stuff too. So which is a bit different than saying, well, you're dotted line to this other team, but your performance review is still going to come from this org. Job swapping. Okay, Philippe. Hopefully that's right. There was another question in here. If I can scroll back.
I think, Chris, on this topic, which is that one of our clients, as part of an OT security initiative that obviously has to involve OT as stakeholders, led to creation of a center of excellence around OT security, which had folks from IT and OT together. So I think these initiatives can lead to that breaking down of silos and an ongoing cross-functional effort.
Okay. There's a question from Teresa about, do you come across manufacturers who feel they are not vulnerable to cyber attacks? And I wonder if, I'm not sure, Teresa, how to take that question. Is that the whole company or just the group, the OT group within the company, manufacturing division of the company, which oftentimes is, a large part of the company. But so I don't know how people feel about that. You come across manufacturers who don't think they're vulnerable?
Yes.
Really?
Or don't think that their product is terribly important. It won't matter that much if it's attacked.
I've come across them. We make pallets, shipping pallets. So for attack. And I do think that there's some there's some legitimacy to that. If you think about risk as impact times likelihood, what's the impact of a cyber attack? It still could be serious for the business, but it's not the same as with, say your businesses, right? So.
When I had a vendor try to tell me that, right, they described their great security processes across their different verticals. And I said, oh, does this one, apply to this particular one for HVAC and whatnot? And they said, well, no, like it doesn't matter if somebody changes the temperature in a conference room. And it's, well, okay, we're using these to regulate, critical temperatures and processes where things really, really matter here. And so, oh yeah, we didn't think about that. Sorry, but we haven't baked any security in, right? So they maybe haven't considered how their customers are using their products.
I think on the whole topic of lateral moves, as we're talking about today as well, that it's an entry point in, right? It may not be the most vulnerable system in terms of impact on the business, but it's an entry point into the attack vectors.
So I wonder if there's other stuff going on where even within the same company, maybe there's a reason not to share. And what has me thinking about is Christian and I met each other some years ago with an organization called the Advanced Cybersecurity Center. And they did cyber simulations, but largely they were one of the original threat sharing organizations. And I know Katie Hughes, I know she's on the call. She's with InfraGard, among other things. But one of the problems that there was with threat sharing organizations, especially before they verticalized, was that I might be sort of a very, from a maturity level, very sophisticated organization. Maybe I'm a pseudo government organization, do a defense contract work, or maybe I'm a large bank, part of the Federal Reserve System, what have you. In that case, I'm very well funded. I have very sophisticated adversaries. I have threat hunters. I'm generating threat intel that's just not available off, the feeds from the vendors. But if I provide that intel into the community without, there are some people that I might trust, like other government agencies or defense contractors or what have you. But if I just provide that into the community for sort of less sophisticated organizations, then there's actually a tell to the adversaries, right? So I know what's going on, or there's noise or chatter, what have you. So there was sort of structural problems with threat sharing. So my question is, from an organizational perspective, are there structural problems with integrating this stuff? Long-winded question. I can see people moving, so my video is not frozen.
Yeah, I'm still digesting that one, I think.
All right, bad question.
Or lack of understanding, one of the two.
Yeah. Do you see value? That's another question from the audience, from Philippe. Philippe, you see value in creating cross-functional teams? I think that was a hard yes. Just trying to scan through some of these other questions.
Well, I mean, the other interesting aspect of the previous question, which is, are some companies, do they feel they're immune? I mean, a couple of years ago, when we saw attacks on critical infrastructure in Ukraine, for example, 2015, 2016, two separate occasions, their power system was brought down. A lot of people were saying, well, we're not in the Ukraine. Why would a nation state come after us? We don't really have to worry about these things. But what's happened now is that, as we've seen in other areas, the tactics that nation states use are very easily and quickly shared with cybercrime groups. So now we're seeing ransomware gangs going after critical infrastructure and industrial organizations. And all of a sudden, the board is realizing that this can be a serious impact on revenue and customer deliveries and things like that. So I think a lot has changed in the last few years with respect to people feeling that they're immune from these types of attacks.
That's a for sure, right? And we've seen some evolution in that space where you get people who moonlight one way or the other between the different groups. There's one nation state that's as interested in the cybercrime as they are in the espionage. So yeah, pretending that you're immune to those attacks isn't going to get you very far.
And there was an interesting quote from the head of Cyber Command a few weeks ago, where they said we're going after these cybercrime gangs. And that was a big shift in policy, because in the past it was like, well, we're only going after nation states. And now that we realize that cybercrime gangs can go after our critical infrastructure as well, we're working at a nation state level to fight them, whereas we weren't in the past.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And I saw something that said we're going to pay not for like arrest and conviction, but just the location, like the physical location of these people.
Yep.
Which I thought was very interesting. I thought, oh, they're going to do something different than they have in the past if they want to know physical location. So, okay. So I don't know that I saw, there's been a bunch of stuff streaming by, but I don't know that I saw a lot of stuff about people wanting to opt in for contact. So I'll just remind people of that. And then I'll jump on to, like, put in the chat if you want to opt in to have your contact information shared. There's looks like Griffin, very specific question. Have any of the panel experience with pharma come across any good audit aid, memoirs, or guidance? Increase on cybersecurity and equipment and system vendor audits. Not really sure what's meant by that question.
Well, I think, and I need to be careful about what I share here, but there is an ISAC that is working on that very specifically. So yes, and if you belong to an ISAC in that space, you should check with them.
Okay.
I mean, I do think the broader question of has the audit side caught up with this issue is an interesting question. Be curious to hear, Christian, if you found that the auditors are starting to ask the same kinds of questions about OT security as they've been asking about IT security. I remember a couple of years ago, I was working for a database security vendor, and for the first time, auditors were asking, "What are you doing to protect your databases? How do you know if DBAs haven't been tampering with the data in those databases?" But that was driven by Sarbanes-Oxley and later by PCI. So I don't know if the auditors are catching up, but I think as a recommendation, it might be good to help educate the auditors about what questions they should be asking so you can get things done in your company. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we're doing an assessment right now, and that's one of the things that I've really asked the vendor to do. I've kind of tried to invite them into that space and said, this is just as important as everything else for us.
Yeah.
So and Phil, to add to that, definitely something that's a huge impact in the physical world of providing both audit and proof of who has physical access to different spaces, what assets are in those spaces from an IT or OT perspective that could be potentially physically accessed, which I think as the physical security industry matures and moves toward a connectivity stance, we're seeing whole new threats there. Recently there was a vulnerability made public on an access control reader. We use them every day. We swipe our badges. We use our mobile phones, other devices. The connectivity on these devices is increasing to the point where there's a denial of a service attack that's been announced. Which most people didn't see as a threat. Okay, so if there's a denial of service on my reader, people can't use it. What's the big deal? But of course, the operational impact of that is if we can't use our access control systems to authenticate people into buildings, into spaces, we open the doors. Maybe we put a guard there to look at people's badges as they come in, but we've removed the layer of protection that we're reliant upon.
No, that's a good example because it's beyond OT. I mean, some people think of building automation or access control systems as OT. Some people think of them as IoT, but either way, the vendors typically have neglected security in that space. It hasn't been a high priority for them. So you'll often find those vulnerabilities not even being patchable. And there have been a couple of stories in the last few years about denial of service attacks like the ones you just mentioned. But the interesting thing is, anything that enables the adversary to establish a foothold in that device for denial of service probably also enables them to get access to your IT network or your OT network. So it's just a matter of time until that becomes the next step after they've compromised your camera, your building access control system, your HVAC system, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Phil, I have to say, is audit catching up sort of struck a nerve with me. The history of Nymi is a bunch of PhDs figured out that ECG is a better biometric than anything else available. So it's a stronger assurance that it's you. And but that first product was not commercially viable to a large part because no one accepted that. So especially say in pharma, where a lot of our customers are, there's is this a valid electronic signature? Because it was new, it was different. So the second generation of the product actually does not rely. It still uses ECG, but it does not rely on ECG to identify you. It uses fingerprint because it's accepted. Because audit accepts that as a valid, sort of digital signature. So there's another question in here about cyber insurance. Does it give people a false sense of safety? And sort of just to provide a little bit more, maybe open that question up a little bit. I can tell you, we're working with a company that is making changes in their OT environment just so they can get cyber insurance because they haven't been able to get it. And then also, and I don't know if he made the call, but there was a gentleman from a large insurance company. He specifically joined the call because of the topic, but he's in charge of cyber risk assessments research, right? And this is a sort of reinsurance. They're insuring large corporations, and it's for everything. It's not for cyber risk. It's for things that impact the business. Cyber being one of them. So any thoughts on the cyber insurance issue? And does it give people a false sense of safety?
I guess I would say that I think cyber insurance is, an important part of your program, but certainly if you look to that as sort of, the first thing you're going to do, you've got a big problem, right? Because once you're calling the insurance company, something bad already happened. So you didn't identify, you didn't prevent, at some point you detected, or maybe you got a phone call, right? So I think that it's up to all of us to make sure to educate leadership about where this fits into the program, that yes, it's an important component, but there are many other things that we need to do, right? So again, I think it's just our responsibility to educate people about kind of where it fits into a program.
Okay, thanks. I did want to, and we're burning through the time, which is great, but I did want to shift just a bit to the tech, and there's a relevant question in there from Simon, sort of along those lines. So it does seem like in the security space, pretty much anything that we've done over the years to make things more secure, we make it harder for the workers, we make it harder for the adversaries to move laterally, we make it harder for our workers. Security people are always talking about, no, security is like the brakes. It can let the car go faster, safely, or, we do this to enable the business. But it is a very difficult problem, right? You're locking things down, you're making it harder for data to flow, you're making it harder for the workers. There's a question from Simon about, have you experienced any specific security problems with companies shifting to biometric authentication technologies? Is there any downside of the use of these technologies? I think that sort of fits into that thing, So as we connect these systems together, and we need to find a way to increase security at the same time, are we necessarily making it worse for the business, for data, for processes, for the workers? And are there things that we can do to unlock that or cut that Gordian knot, or however you want to characterize that?
I guess I'll kick off there by saying convenience is the enemy of security, right? People are going to find the easiest way to do something. They're going to find the path of least resistance. So, as increased security measures make things less convenient, we all know that encourages just bad behavior and bad practice, let alone specific attacks. I think some of the conversation that we had previously to this was talking about security and convenience being on opposing axes, and how are they separated? How do we increase security posture whilst increasing convenience for those that should have access? not one I have an answer to, but one I'd love to hear some thoughts on.
Well, and I think this may be a place where biometrics is starting to provide a bit of an example, right? There are certainly some specific examples of, people being able to use like a gummy bear and whatever and fake out a thumbprint reader, and they're really, really cool. I'm not aware of a lot of this happening in the real world. And I think for most of us, the ability to, put our finger on our phone or look at it or whatever and just be logged in is actually a lot better. And I don't think there's going to be a big argument whether that's more secure than passwords or not. So I think we are starting to go that way. And I think there is certainly a lot of promise in that space.
So you keep popping on like you're going to speak. You going to add to that or no?
I'm responding to somebody in the chat. I would just say that, if you just look at the problem of secure remote access to OT, which all of your OT equipment vendors require, in many cases in the past, it was implemented in the easiest way possible, possibly even using shared credentials. And that's a #1 attack vector, or one of the top attack vectors. So if you implement VPNs, DMZs, multi-factor authentication, it's going to make things a little harder and a little more inconvenient, both for your vendors and for your remote employees. But, if you look at the water utility attack in Florida earlier this year, it was through a Teams viewer account that had either poor credentials or no credentials. So you need to be able to do those things, and it will make things a little more inconvenient, but you just have to do it.
Okay. So there's a note from Philippe, but it talks about difficulties in convergence from the vendors not being on board. And by that, as a vendor, I take that to mean standards, maybe, but I don't want to infer what the right answer is. But and I'll tell you, as a vendor, it is difficult because there's lots of standards, right? So there's lots. You just got to pick which ones you're going to work on in terms of what's going to get you the most traction. But are there standards around this stuff that the three of you are thinking about or looking for? If you look to a vendor to say, hey, I want them to have this kind of functionality, be in this consortium, support this standard, what have you.
I think, Chris, that you may have misinterpreted the gentleman's question. I think he's talking about more if you buy OT equipment, they're still operating in a model kind of like the way computers were being sold 20 years ago, where it's a closed system. You're not allowed to install anything on them. You're not allowed to change anything in them. It's a black box essentially. And so you can't put an agent on them. And that's why if you look at the OT security monitoring technologies that have come out in the last couple of years, they're all network-based, agentless technologies where you don't have to make any changes to those. Over time, I think that industry is going to evolve and it's going to become more open. Some of those functions like HMIs are going to move into the cloud. So that's going to make things easier. If you look at even a couple of years ago, the OT equipment vendors weren't even allowing you to install antivirus on those systems, but that's changed over time. So I think you just have to keep pushing back on those OT equipment vendors and then do whatever you can within your own environment to monitor them for attacks.
Okay. I still want to answer my question though. So, which is, are there standards are good? Are there standards around this stuff that people look for?
I don't think it's as much standards as frameworks. A lot of folks I know they apply the NIST framework to OT, just like they do to IT. Gartner has put out a couple of really good reports on OT security framework specifically, looking at multiple domains, including remote access and other areas. So I think it's more around, Philip's pointing out that there is a standard IEC 62443. You're right. Yes. I think it's primarily in Europe. I don't see a lot of folks in North America using it.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking more about things like FIDO. If we could standardize on something like FIDO, it's sort of strong credentials, what have you. And we are winding down. If there's any last questions from the audience, there is a question here, follow-up to Simon's question from Iman about GDPR, biometrics and GDPR, and is that problematic? So I can tell you that privacy from our perspective as a vendor is a nightmare globally, but so then there are specific things we do to protect the user's privacy. And if you're interested in that, I would suggest you really read up on privacy by design, which came out of the Canadian, actually the Ontario government, but then was adopted by GDPR, subsequently adopted, or actually it was adopted by the Netherlands. That was subsequently adopted by the GDPR and then the California Privacy Act. So that really gets to the sort of fundamental things that you want to be building into your design to protect privacy, even if you're using something like biometrics. So I don't know if anybody had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'd add, so deployed a lot of biometrics around Europe and the US, and I think there are definitely legal and intercompany policies and compliance that need to be taken into account. But I would also state that not all biometrics are created equal when it comes to the perception of an individual. So on the one hand, I have to comply with global policy, I have to comply with international, national policy and company policy. On the second level, I need buy-in. If my people aren't interested in this, then no amount of compliance is gonna get me where I need to go.
Yeah, and I will tell you, Rob, that has been our experience. So I'm completely comfortable from a GDPR perspective. We can show the customers the data. We're GDPR compliant. We're very, very particular about what we do to protect all of the users' privacy. But what you have to get over is not the governance people. We need to answer their questions, but it's a change management thing. It's people don't like to be tracked. They don't like to share personal. That's a bigger challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a change management socialization issue more than a technical issue, for sure. Okay, so there's a couple of more standards posted in there. There's some frameworks posted in the chat. I don't know, Joy. I suspect we can make the journal of the chat available to people when we provide the recording as well. That might be a good idea if people want to dig into that to answer some of the questions. If there's no other questions from the audience, given the time, maybe we can go out with just a minute or two or a couple of sentences from the participants on the classic, sort of what's your prediction, what's your counterintuitive prediction for the future on this stuff, where we're going to go, if people have thoughts on that.
Let me jump in as someone that's perhaps a step removed from a lot of this and learning a lot as we have this conversation, along many others. I think in terms of kind of counterintuitive predictions, I would both love to see and potentially predict that, as we stand today, any system that I'm interacting with is responsible for issuing me with some type of authentication, whether it's something I have, something I know, something something I am. I would love to see myself be able to take control of that. In terms of identifying and authenticating myself, almost a bring your own identity approach. As it stands today, I get issued credentials from, my company. I get given a physical key to open my car. I have, a PIN number on my credit card. I would love to be able to bring all of that into myself and have a bring your own authentication type approach.
Great. Bill or Christian, any final thoughts?
I can give it a shot. I feel like I've been doing this long enough that when you asked about, counterintuitive security prediction, I thought, I'd come up with something cynical and that's not going to be as good as you think. And then I remembered that I'm an optimist, which is, I think, why I keep doing this. So I'm going to go the other way. And maybe this is a little bit underwhelming, given I think it's surfaced a little bit in the discussion already today. But frankly, I'm just sick of taking as a given that security and convenience have to be kind of the inverse of one another. So I'm going to say that, in the future, we're going to find a way to make the easy thing also the secure thing. And that's a little bit hard for some folks in my profession to think about right now, but I feel like we have to get there.
I love it. Love it. Phil, anything from Microsoft or you?
Well, for me personally, I'm going to go for the doom and gloom. I'm going to say we're going to see more attacks on food production. We're going to see possibly a safety incident in the next year or so. There have been a couple of attempts. The Triton attack, for example, was an attempt to blow up a petrochemical facility. So I think we're going to see escalation in this domain, and it's going to lead to, impacts to us personally, like with food, but also possibly safety incidents.
Yeah, so I would just say I know someone that works in pretty high level with the U.S. government in airport security, and their big concern is bioterrorism. So for the shipping, there's so much produce that gets shipped into this country, but their big concern is bioterrorism. So which is kind of a scary thing. So. Okay, well, on that happy note, I would like to wrap it up. I think what we wanted to do here was just to share some ideas, both collaborate with the participants, with the help of the three key panelists, share some ideas in this space instead of trying to move the ball forward. I do feel pretty good about that. So I'd like to thank everybody, not just the panelists, but all the participants as well. There's some good stuff in the chat. We'll certainly get that out to everybody. I do think we failed on using the quotes from the movies miserably, but
I definitely got one in there.
Yeah,
I'll let you go back through the recording and see if you can
have to go back and check and see if you get the award, Rob. So, but if we had to fail at one, I'd say that's a good one to fail at. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for your help today and participation, and maybe we should do something like this again soon and build some kind of community around this. Would be great. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.